What is going on, football fans? Back at it with another New York Giants video. Kind of slow right now on the Giants front, even though the draft's only about 2.5 weeks away, and I can't wait to start to dive into full draft coverage with you guys about a week leading up into the draft. There's hopefully more and more rumors start to circulate, but there hasn't been a ton coming out on the New York Giants front. I will have a mock draft up in about 3 or 4 days, simulating a different scenario than what I've done in the past. Of course, my last one, I took Devontae Smith. The draft before that, I took Rashawn Slater. But one topic that often comes up on Twitter, in my comments, when it's around draft time, is BPA versus need. And a lot of you guys in my comments always just automatically say, you take the best available player. And some people feel like you got to prioritize need. And I think it's a very good question to have, and I'm going to give my explanation in this video as to what I think the New York Giants should do in this year's draft. Now, if you look at the New York Giants roster, and I've talked about it time and time again, in my opinion, the two biggest need on this roster, far and away, and it's why you've heard rumors now that the New York Giants are potentially interested in guys like Azeez Ojulari, they're interested in JOK, or the edge rusher, and the offensive line, specifically the interior offensive line. And one argument that I always hear for people in favor of taking the wide receiver is they say, well, you're only one injury away from, having a big problem at that position with a guy like Kenny Golladay going down. And that's fair, and that's true. John Ross, of course, has injury history as well, but you could say the same thing for the edge rusher. I mean, last year, our two starting edge rushers went down with injuries. Oshane Ximines was out for the year. The same could be said for Lorenzo Carter. And we don't really have an answer at that position outside of those two players. It's definitely the weakest part on the defense, and it's probably the weakest position group on this team. And if it's not, it's probably the guard spot on the offensive line, or even potentially the tackle, being that Matt Barrett is a big question mark. But I definitely think if you're talking just need, you're looking at either edge rusher or you're looking at offensive line for the New York Giants in the first round. The problem is at that position, specifically the edge rusher, in this year's draft, there's not really any edge rushers that many people feel warrant taking at the number 11 overall pick. Now, that does not mean that the New York Giants don't evaluate some of these prospects higher. A guy like Ojulari, maybe a guy like Parsons. He's probably a little bit higher. He's more of a linebacker, though, that people feel could play off the edge, but there's character concerns there. A number of other players that maybe they'll take. Greg Rousseau, even though he's not my ideal choice. Jalen Phillips. And maybe that is the route that the New York Giants will take. After all, they did express interest in free agency and trying to bring in a few edge rushers. So maybe that's the route they will take. As far as the offensive line goes, and I posted this on Twitter today, I don't even think it's a debate. It is a huge need for this team. And when you look at the numbers, and I want to first start off by saying that I fully recognize that the offensive line is not the only responsible factor for sacks. The quarterback definitely plays a part. The wide receivers unable to create separation definitely plays a part. But the offensive line absolutely plays a major part. And maybe some people feel another year of continuity, another year of playing together will fix that. And what I'll say is this: if the New York Giants do not address the offensive line in the first or second round of this year's draft, we have to hope and pray as Giants fans that that is the case. These guys playing together another year together, maybe they'll become that much better. Maybe the improved coaching staff, bringing in, Flaherty, the former O-line coach here, bringing in Rob Sale, Joe Judge having a more hands-on approach. Maybe that will get the most out of this talent on this roster. But if you look at the stats last year, the New York Giants allowed the second most sacks in the NFL, despite only throwing the 26th most times in the sport. To no surprise, the 8 teams that allowed the fewest sacks were in the playoffs. The Steelers, Colts, Bucks, Packers, Browns, Chiefs, Titans, Saints. The 8 fewest sacks, all 8 teams made the playoffs. No real surprise there. It's not rocket science. Now, the question is, what is the biggest reason for it? Is it more so the offensive line that needs to be improved? Is it the improved weaponry around Daniel Jones will make this offense less predictable? Getting Saquon Barkley back? I think all play a major factor, but I think there's no denying it. We absolutely could use more talent on that offensive line. Those numbers are pathetic. And some of that goes on Jones, some of that goes on the weaponry and everything else. But the Giants did go out there and spend $100 million in free agency, bring in guys like Kyle Rudolph, bring in guys like Kenny Golladay. And they also, with those numbers, lost their best offensive lineman, or at least debatably their best offensive lineman last year on this roster. And that is Kevin Zeitler. And that's why I continue to say that I think that they need to think long and hard about taking an offensive lineman, if not in the first, then in the second. If Rashawn Slater does not drop, yes, you could at least argue a guy like Vera Tucker could be a reach. A guy like Darisaw could be a reach at number 11, especially if a guy like Devontae Smith is on the board. And what I'll say is this, and I continue to say it, if the Giants feel that Devontae Smith is going to be a top 10 wide receiver in this league, it warrants the pick. You take him. But when a wide receiver is not our biggest need, and in my opinion, as I've expressed in prior videos, it is a position where you could get value historically later in the draft. You look at the top 10 wide receivers in this league, probably 8 of them were not first-round picks. Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas, DK Metcalf, Tyreek Hill. You could go down a laundry list of wide receivers that were not first-round picks that are highly productive players, and some of that has to do with the offensive scheme that they play, and some of that has to do with the quarterback. But it is a position historically that you could get great value at. But if they feel he's if he's going to be a top 10 talent, yeah, you take that pick and then you hope to get value later in the draft. And you can't really go wrong there. But will the New York Giants draft for best player available? And will Devontae Smith even be the best player available on their board when they're picking? There was a rumor that came out today from Jordan Renan, actually, that the Giants may have interest in drafting Patrick Surtain. Now, do I believe that? No. But by the if you go by the logic of best player available, you could at least argue that Patrick Surtain could be the best player available on the board. But it's funny to me how Giants fans would look at Patrick Surtain and scoff. But when it comes to Devontae Smith, after we brought in Kenny Golladay, after we got Saquon Barkley back, they need to take him. But you could just as easily argue that even though it would be a depth piece, it could be a cornerback of the future. We don't know how long Bradbury's going to be or so on and so forth. By no means am I advocating for taking a cornerback. I'm not. I would much sooner take a guy like Devontae Smith, but you could at least argue that Patrick Surtain will be the best player available. And it's why I go back to you have to also evaluate need. And in a best-case scenario, I think need meets best player available. I am never in favor of reaching, way down. But if it's 2 or 3 spots and you're splitting hairs, and we're going to get into Dave Gettleman's quote from last year, yes, I could be on board with it, especially if it fills a huge need. And this was off the mouth of Dave Gettleman, who kind of contradicted himself his first year here, while he was the general manager with the New York Giants, when he said you always take best available player, or somewhere along those lines, when he was picking number 2 overall and he took Saquon Barkley. He said he was touched by the hand of God. Just last year, off the mouth of Dave Gettleman, this is what he had to say when he was picking 4th overall. He did, however, go on later to say that he wants to envision the guy in a gold jacket when you're picking that early. On value versus need, when you're splitting hairs, it's okay to take the lower-rated player if it's a bigger position of need. So Gettleman right there is telling you last year that, yeah, if he feels 2 prospects are close, he's going to go more for need than best player available. And honestly, I think that is the right way to draft. You can't always draft the best player available because you may have a more pressing need. And I don't even think anybody would debate, based off what we spent in free agency, that the edge rusher is a bigger need. The interior offensive line is a bigger need, or potentially even the tackle, depending on how we feel about Matt Barrett, if there was the right prospect there. The question will be, will that prospect be there? And if they are they close enough to a guy like Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith to warrant the New York Giants selecting them there at number 11 overall? Right now, I'm guessing, guys. I honestly don't know what the New York Giants are going to do with this pick. But if Slater's off the board, and if I had to guess, I think he probably will be. I think it's going to be down to a wide receiver or an edge. And something is telling me in the back of my head that they could be leaning with the edge prospect. Of course, they could look to try to trade down, but there's got to be a trade partner there. But as far as the old argument goes, best player available versus need, I think it's like anything else. When I talk about the Giants offense, when I talk about anything in football, I think it's balance. I think you need to evaluate both. You need to evaluate what's your biggest need, and if it's within 2 or 3 spots of the best player available, as long as that best player available is not valued as an unbelievable otherworldly talent, I think you usually tend to go more towards need as long as it's within reason. Now, if you take Waddle or if you take Smith, obviously the Giants probably feel that that player is an elite talent. And if they are a top 8 to 10 wide receiver in this league, it warrants the pick. And we'll see how it all plays out on draft night. Regardless, I will not be upset if they go wide receiver, if they go line, or if they go edge in the first round. Then, in the second, you fill in your other vacancy. If you go wide receiver, you go line in the second. If you go edge, you probably still go line in the second. But we'll have to wait and see how it all plays out. But I want to get a video up on that, talking about how I feel about best available player versus need and how Gettleman has talked about it in the past. As always, guys, if you like what you watch, please subscribe. Drop a comment. Maybe give me a little thumbs up. Cheers.